If you have a Fujifilm camera with a PASM dial like an X-H2 or an X-H2S, then this is definitely the video for you. Hi everyone, welcome to Pal to Tech. The most talked about ergonomic change that Fujifilm made to their recent lineup of cameras is the switching over from the multiple dedicated dials, like you have on the X-T4, to a single dial like this one included on the X-H2S. This is called the PASM Dial, which stands for the P, A, S, and M letters that you see written on it. Now, whether you like them or you hate them, PASM dials are a completely different approach to controlling your camera's exposure. For the purpose of today's video, I'm going to assume that you're already familiar with the exposure triangle, and you already know how aperture, shutter speed, and ISO affect your exposure. Also, if you have an X-H2 or X-H2S camera with you, you might want to take it out now and follow along. So now, looking at the dial, let's start with the P, A, S, and M settings. These stand for program, aperture, shutter speed, and manual. Let's start with program. By setting the dial to P for program, you are telling the camera to automatically choose shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. All three of them. And you know you're in P mode because all three exposure triangle settings across the bottom of the display will be in white. You see that there? Also, you can see the letter P right here. The camera is now handling all parts of your exposure. So you just worry about focusing and taking your shot. Now, while you are in P mode, there are two adjustments that you can make. First, you can program shift. This is where you rotate the front command dial to cycle through pre-chosen camera combinations of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now, your camera will keep the same exposure, but you're forcing it to use a different combination of that shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So why would you want to do this and use program shift? Well, suppose you're standing out in the street and you've got your PASM dial set to P mode, and the camera is automatically setting things at 1/60th of a second at f1.4. However, right at that moment, someone on a bicycle goes riding by, and you want to force your camera to use a lower shutter speed, say 1/30th of a second, so that you can follow the person on the bicycle, right? Keeping the bike rider in focus, but blurring out the background. So you want to quickly change your shutter speed to say 1/30th of a second. So you rotate the front command dial and program shift the camera's P setting to slow down the shutter speed to 1/30th of a second. Notice how the camera then automatically alters the other exposure triangle settings. In this case, the f-stop, so that your exposure remains the exact same as before. Same exposure, different triangle settings. That is program shift. Now, also something to remember is that program shift will not work if you're shooting video, and it will not work if you have your dynamic range in the camera set to auto. Now, the second adjustment that you can make in P mode is called exposure compensation. And here, you rotate the rear command dial to either brighten or to darken your scene. You're basically telling your camera, I know, the light meter says it should be at this level of brightness, but I want to make it brighter or darker, depending upon what you want. The camera then uses that as the exposure calculation to apply the various exposure triangle settings. And most of the time, that's what you would be doing. You would use the exposure compensation rear command dial instead of using program shift on the front command dial. And just so you know, if you are in P mode on the PASM dial and you run into situations where there's just not enough light, you will see three dashes appear for your aperture and or your shutter speed. Moving on. The next setting on the PASM dial is A for aperture. If you set it to A, you are telling the camera that you will choose the aperture and that the camera will worry about the shutter speed and the ISO. And of course, you will be using the aperture ring on your lens to adjust the aperture. Notice how the aperture setting in your viewfinder is blue now. You see that? Blue means that this is the exposure triangle setting that you told the PASM dial you want to have control over. And if there's not enough light, you'll see the shutter speed, which is what the camera's controlling, appear in red. Now, instead of using the aperture ring on the front of the lens, you can adjust the aperture using the front command dial if you prefer. But you need to put the aperture ring in A in order to do this. That's a little confusing because remember that A, right, in this case does not mean automatic aperture, but rather you've told the camera by setting the PASM dial to A that you want to control the aperture. So by putting the aperture ring on the lens into A, this this simply allows you to control the aperture from the front command dial instead. You would also use the front command dial to control the aperture if you have any lens that doesn't have an aperture ring on it. And just like program mode, you can use the rear command dial as the exposure compensation dial to adjust your camera's exposure compensation up or down, in which case the camera will decide what shutter speed and ISO to use depending upon whether you want more or less light. The next PASM dial setting is S for shutter speed. Now, setting the PASM dial to S allows you to control the shutter speed while the camera chooses the aperture and the ISO. And just like A for aperture and P for program, if you don't have enough light in your scene, the aperture display will show 3 dashes, or if you're half pressing down the shutter button, you may see your aperture appear in red. And just like A and P mode, by default, you can use the rear command dial to adjust your camera's exposure compensation up or down. And just so you know, you don't have to use the front or the rear command dials exactly as is. You can actually switch it to the rear command dial, or you can mix and match it between the two. And the way you do that is you go into your settings, down to the wrench, into button dial setting, and where it says command dial setting, look at all of the options you have right here to change them. For each PASM mode on the dial, you can adjust both the rear and the front command dials. And finally, we come to M for manual. And of course, that's exactly what you think it is. Complete control over aperture, shutter speed, and ISO of the camera. Now in manual mode, you'll notice that both your aperture and your shutter speed in the display are in blue. Now when you have your PASM dial set to manual, by default, the front command dial will select your shutter speed, and you use your aperture ring on your lens to control the aperture. If you have a lens without an aperture ring, then your rear command dial will control the aperture. And of course, just as I mentioned earlier, you can override this and change which dials control what functions in your button settings of your menu. Now, with everything that I just mentioned, P, A, S, and M on your dial, you need to remember how ISO fits into all of this. And in the case of the X-H2 and X-H2S, you need to turn your attention to the ISO button right here. You see it? Now on the dial, you've got your various fixed ISO settings that you can choose, plus some automatic ones. So for example, if I set my ISO to a fixed value of say 200, and then I put my PASM dial in S for shutter speed priority, then the camera now has ISO and shutter speed locked to fixed values, and then the exposure compensation dial will only automatically adjust aperture. Likewise, if I set my PASM dial to A for aperture and my ISO to that same fixed value of 200 again, the only thing that changes when I rotate the exposure compensation dial is my shutter speed. I do think that the way ISO sort of integrates with the PASM dial can confuse people, because in addition to these fixed ISO values, you also have these automatic ISO values that you can set. This gives you the ability to allow the camera to control the ISO automatically within a certain range that you set. So for example, if I set ISO to auto 3, then regardless of what setting I have the P, A, S, and M on the PASM dial set to, the camera will always try and use the lowest ISO of 160 all the way through a very high ISO of 12,800. Likewise, if I have my ISO set to say auto 1, then the camera will try and use the low ISO of 160 as much as it can if it needs more light in the scene, but it will increase the ISO all the way up to ISO 800, which was the limit that I had set. After that, it's at its limit, and it will instead use another part of the exposure triangle, namely shutter speed or aperture. But which one? Well, that all depends on what you have your PASM dial set to. If you set it to A, where the camera is going to be controlling the shutter speed now, then based on those settings, once I hit that ISO 800 max threshold, then the camera will turn to adjusting the shutter speed to get the proper exposure. And if you're coming from an X-T3 or an X-T4, this can take some getting used to. But really, if you think about it, whether you have a dedicated ISO dial on the camera or an ISO button here that pulls up the menu, it's the same settings and the same function. Now, I have a whole video on best practices for auto ISO, and I will link to that video down in the description below. Okay, that was a lot to take in. Let's do an easy one now. Basically, if you choose filter on the PASM dial, you're going going to want to go into the camera's menu where you see the little camera icon where it says filter setting. And here you can choose one of a bunch of different filters that you can apply. I have a whole video on the filters, so I'm not going to get into it here, but that's what that's for on the PASM dial. And you'll see the filter that you selected right here in the lower left part of the screen. Next, we have the movie shooting icon. Once you have this selected on the PASM dial, all of the video shooting options will now appear in your camera's menu, and you've essentially turned a still photography camera into a video camera. If you have this video icon selected on your PASM dial, then when you press the shutter release button, you'll begin shooting video. Otherwise, if you're in the PASM or the filter, the only way you can begin shooting video is to press the red video button right here. A bit confusing, right? Two different video buttons. Just remember that the red one will always start the camera shooting video, while the regular shutter release button will only start shooting video if you are in the video mode on your PASM dial, or you're set up with one of these custom settings right here, which is a great time to talk about those. So finally, we get to the 7 custom mode settings on the PASM dial. Basically, these allow you to take a complete snapshot of all of your camera's settings, either for still or video, and save them to one of these 7 locations right here. Then when you want to quickly recall them, you just turn the dial to the applicable one. One handy tip to remember is that whatever custom setting you currently have on the PASM dial, you will see that right in your menu here. You see that? I have it dialed into C4 at the top, and it shows C4 in the lower left portion of the menu. So I have come up with a series of steps that I think will help ensure that you set them up in the most successful way that you can. The first thing you want to do is get out a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen and plan it out. Before you even pick up the camera, you know that you have 7 different choices. Kind of get an idea in your mind of what you shoot most often and what you'd want those settings to be. For example, are you only a stills shooter? Or do you sometimes shoot video but not that often? Or do you shoot equally video and stills? Think about your card slots. Will you mostly be saving to the SD card or the CF Express card, or both? How do you want to have it set up? Your image quality settings, your format and resolution. So for example, you could have one of these custom settings set up as a dedicated social media setting, right? Where it's in the 1:1 format, you're shooting just normal JPEGs in the classic Chrome film simulation. Think about your focus modes. Which ones would you use for what situation? Get those down on paper. Not to mention your AFC custom settings as well. And what I would recommend you do is you start at C1 with the broadest setting for the most variety of shooting conditions, and then cascade them down as you go down the dial. That's one way that you could do it. Another way is you could put the first 4 of them, say, to still shooting and the last 3 of them for video shooting. And speaking of video shooting, put down your frame rates. Do you want one of these just for slow motion B-roll? Do you want one for A-roll? All of that, codecs, everything, you really need to do some thinking. We're now going to start to set them up and we'll go through the rest. Basically, have your PASM dial in one of the PASM settings if you're setting up for stills mode, and then rotate it to the little movie icon when you want to set up these custom settings for movies. The very first thing you want to do is go into the IQ section of your menu and scroll down until you find Auto Update Custom Setting. You see that right there? Disable that. Turn that off. And the reason you want to turn that off, particularly if you're just starting out with this, is it's very easy to accidentally make a setting change and then the camera will auto save that to your custom thing, overriding what you did. So now we're going to set up the very first C1 setting, and I'm going to set it to general shooting conditions that I do around the studio. Now, before you begin adding settings and setting it up, you need to tell your camera that the custom 1 is going to be either stills or video. To do that, go into custom mode setting and pick the custom one you want. In our case, it's C1 because that's the one we're setting up. And I'm going to choose still. I like to have a 3:2 aspect ratio, and I like to shoot in fine RAW. I'll choose Provia for my film simulation, and for my color space, I prefer Adobe RGB. I want it at single autofocus, with single point. And I want to make sure Face Eye Auto Detect is turned off and AF/MF is turned on. That's my preference for now. Once you've sort of made your desired settings, go back to the IQ section of the menu and go down to where it says Edit, Save, Custom Setting. And you'll see a little red dot. You see that right there? That means that there are settings that I've made in the camera that haven't been saved yet. And I want to do that now to the first C1 setting on the PASM dial. I'm going to go ahead and hit Save Current Settings. Okay, done. Now that you've done that, the next thing you need to do right away is name it. And you want to put some thought into these names, which is why you'd want to do it ahead of time. Edit custom name, and I'm just calling this general, for general purpose studio shooting that I do. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm ready to do the next one. And to make it faster, you can copy the settings from one of them and duplicate them over and then add on to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to general, the first one that I had set up, and I'm going to copy. You see that? And then I'm going to paste it into Custom 2. Once I've done that, I immediately want to rename it because it can be confusing. So let's rename the second one. And for this one, I'm going to click the right arrow to move to the end of the word that was in there already, and then click the delete key to remove it and give myself a clean area that I'll now type in the new name. I'm going to call it social media. There it is right there. But now I'm going to add on to those copied settings and make it more social media specific. I'm going to change my image size to be square, which is better for social media. I don't care about having raw. It's just social media. So I'm just going to say normal JPEGs. And for my film simulation, for my branding, let's say I'm going to use classic Chrome. Once you've made all the setting changes you want to your camera, go back into the menu, into Edit, Save, Custom Setting, into Social Media, the one that you want to apply them to, and choose Save Current Settings. Okay, you're done. You've just added 2 of them. Let's add one more, only this time we're going to add a movie mode. I'm going to rotate the PASM dial to the movie icon so that it'll give me all of the movie menu options in my menu. Then I go into my menu, and this time it's in the little movie camera area, and I'm going to go down to Custom Mode Setting. For the third one, that's the one I'm setting, I'm going to choose Movie. So then start to adjust your camera settings to match what you had wanted originally for that. In this case, I want my film simulation to be black and white. For my white balance, I want it to be 5600 Kelvin. I want to make sure my stabilization is turned on, and then I'm shooting in 4K. Again, these settings are just for today's example. Obviously, you're going to have ones that work for you. Once you're all done, go back into the movie icon where it says Edit, Save, Custom, and you're going to hear Custom 3, Save Current Settings. Okay, once you've done that, go back into it and rename it. I'm going to call it Movie Black and White. Now, when it comes to how these things are named, there is a very odd way that Fujifilm does this that I think can confuse a lot of people. Look here. You notice how we had already renamed Custom 1 and Custom 2, right? But when I have the PASM dial set to the little movie icon, the names get reverted back. It's very odd. However, if I rotate the PASM dial to say A for aperture priority, and then I go back into the IQ section, you see it's not there. You see how the 2 stills are named, but the video one is not named. However, it'll still work. Watch, when I rotate the PASM dial, look, now I'm in C3 and it's in that black and white movie mode that I had set up. If I rotate it to C2, now I'm in that social media with the 1:1 aspect ratio. So just a general rule of thumb to remember. If you're wanting to rename or change the name or see the names that you have for your movie custom settings, make sure that the PASM dial is in the movie icon. If you want to look at the stills, then just have it anywhere else pretty much. Now there's one other area you need to be aware of. When you go into your custom settings, there is an additional area called Edit Check, and in that you can specify additional setting parameters. Basically your shooting mode, right? Whether you want it shutter priority, aperture priority, and so forth, as well as your starting aperture, exposure compensation, or your drive mode. And obviously these will change, right? If I choose shutter priority, now I can choose my shutter speed and aperture goes gray. So I will go ahead and set my shooting mode to aperture priority, and notice that there is a red dot. That means I need to save it. So if I go back, save current settings, boom, and just continue setting these up as you get down the dial to 7. I gotta be honest with you, I found this really confusing to get used to, so I wanna go over it one more time and make sure it's drop dead clear, okay? The first thing you do is sketch it out on paper, all right? All of your settings, C1, C2, C3, and so forth, to get a general idea of what you're gonna do. Next, make sure that Auto Update Custom Setting is disabled. Next, choose whether it's going to be stills or video, and go into custom mode setting for the applicable one, and make sure you've selected it properly for the mode that it is in. At this point, then go ahead and make all of the setting changes on your camera. If you are setting for video mode, don't forget to make sure the PASM dial is set to the little video icon. Once you've made all of the setting changes to your camera, go into Edit, Save, Custom Setting, and either update an existing one that you have or start with Custom One and go from there. And click on Save Current Settings and apply it to that preset. And don't forget to name these because you'll be glad you did later on. So give this a try, and remember that if you screw something up, it's fairly easy to fix it. You can go into one of your settings and reset your custom setting, and that will put it back to its original state before you saved any changes to it. Now, there is one last thing to watch out for regarding movie settings, and it's located in your little movie camera icon, Movie Optimized Control. I cannot recommend enough to turn that off before setting up any of your custom settings. Movie Optimized Control, unless you know what you're doing and you understand what it does and why you should use it, can cause other settings like the aperture ring or the shutter on the rear command dial to not work. So make sure it's turned off, especially if you are programming these custom settings. You can always add it back and update your custom settings later on once you understand what it is and you actually decide you want to use it or not. This has been quite a video with a lot of material that I've gone over. Just remember that you can't screw things up. You can always reset those PASM settings and make sure that you outline them ahead of time. And also remember that if you're going to be setting anything for video, to have it in the video icon so that you have access to all of the settings in the video menu. And remember that some of them you won't see in the stills menu that you'll see in the video menu with regard to names. So if you want to rename them, you need to be in the correct PASM dial setting. In other words, video for video or PASM for any of the stills settings. Overall, the PASM dial is something that if you're not used to it, you're going to have to work with it for a few weeks to get in the groove of using it. It's very different than dedicated dials on a Fuji camera. Hopefully though, if you start to use and plan out how you want to use these custom settings, you'll be able to be in a place where you can quickly dial in the type of shooting that you're doing and in fact actually use the PASM dial for what it's intended, which is quick access to the type of settings that you want. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful to you or at least entertaining. And if it has, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. I'm going to be signing off now, but have a wonderful weekend and I'll see you in a new video next week. Take care.